History, sisters and brothers, makes you powerful. History educates you. And if you know your facts and you know your realities, no one can defeat you in a debate. The purpose, once again, is not to justify, but merely remind us that those people who are most eager to point fingers are usually the most guilty of having done the same crimes. As for me, I have no qualms stating loudly and clearly that the Quran teaches us, the Sunnah teaches us, the Seerah teaches us that the default is that during times of war, we're supposed to protect the lives of the innocent. But I merely educate, I merely push back and say, how come you are selective in applying these rules, throwing them in our faces, which we acknowledge these are legitimate rules, when you yourselves don't seem to care about the lives of 2 million innocent civilians? Where is your own supposed care? Where is your own alleged concern for the women and children when they belong to another ethnicity and another religious group? Muslims, always remember this reality in this land. You don't need to be a Muslim to sympathize with one side. As I said, if the war was somewhat similar, we could understand the bias of each side. But there is no similarity. The fact of the matter is, every neutral person who examines the reality of this situation will come to the same conclusion. Always quote neutral experts and make sure you know these quotes. One of the greatest icons of our century, somebody whom the globe admires, is Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in isolation. 27 years because he refused to sign a paper that said, because of the color of my skin, I'm not equal to you. 27 years he was in isolation. I visited his cell. It is smaller than the small little box that I'm in. I visited his cell and I stood there. He had a small window for 27 years. That was his outer reality to the world. He refused as a man of conscience to say, I am lesser of a human being. And when he was in jail, this country of ours and the United Kingdom and Canada and Australia all consider him a terrorist. You should know this. Our country considered Nelson Mandela to be a terrorist. Only when he was released and the tide of public tide was changed was he welcomed as a freedom fighter, was he welcomed as somebody who deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, and so on and so forth. Nelson Mandela was an ardent supporter of the Palestinian cause. Multiple times he would speak out and in support of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And he said, and I quote, that the treatment of the Palestinians is the worst moral crises of our times. He said this after being in jail 27 years, after fighting the apartheid South African regime. He said the Palestinian plight is the worst moral crisis of our own times. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the second most prevalent African freedom fighter. Desmond Tutu is the highest ranking member of the Catholic Church. He's passed away now. Widely celebrated, widely known to be a freedom fighter, also having been in jail, also fought apartheid. Archbishop Desmond Tutu visited Palestine multiple times. In a famous interview in the 80s with the most famous journalist alive at the time, David Frost, you can find it on YouTube. David Frost wanted to complain to Desmond Tutu, how come you can describe Israel as an apartheid state? That's not fair. You shouldn't describe Israel as an apartheid state. It's not that bad. Desmond Tutu responded back to him that actually, listen to this, is on YouTube, actually in some aspects Palestinians are treated worse than us black South Africans were. In some aspects, it is worse than an apartheid state that I have lived through. This is from Desmond Tutu. Are you going to accuse him of being anti-Semite? Are you going to accuse him of being pro-Palestinian because he's Muslim? He's an Archbishop of the Catholic Church. He's not a Muslim, but he has lived through apartheid. He's seen the realities of hate, and now he's experienced it firsthand. The grandson of Nelson Mandela also visited Palestine, and he wrote an op-ed which is published in an Israeli newspaper, the Haaretz, and he wrote an op-ed and he said that what I have seen here is worse than the apartheid that I have experienced growing up. This is the grandson of Nelson Mandela. It is worse than the apartheid I have experienced growing up. Sisters and brothers, you don't need to be a Muslim to recognize the inhumanity of the situation. Know your people, know your quotes. Our own President Jimmy Carter, he visited those lands, and after he left office, he's still alive now, after he left office, he wrote a book. Do you know what the title of the book is? Peace, Not Apartheid. Peace, not apartheid. That is the title of the book. Our president, are you going to accuse him? He's actually a Christian believer. He's actually a supporter of the faith of Christianity. He's a known person who loves his faith and tradition. He's not a Muslim. And yet when he visited, he said, we cannot move forward with this apartheid regime. And he himself acknowledged that Gaza is the largest open air prison in the world today. The largest open air prison in the world today. And I can quote you on and on. Human rights, Amnesty International, on and on. But you know what the problem is, sisters and brothers? The awkward reality. Do you know what the root of the problem is? It's not religion. Frankly, it's not even fully political. The brutal and raw fact of the matter is that so many people on our side of the world, in spite of our education, in spite of our achievements, in spite of we're living in such an enlightened era, so many people are still completely and totally wed to the notion of the superiority of their own race over that of other people. The root of the problem, frankly, is a racist outlook on the Palestinians and the Arabs and the Muslims. The root of the problem is the superiority complex, that they don't view Palestinian blood and Arab blood and Muslim blood to be equal to their own. And therefore, when they see all that is happening, when they see all of the tactics, their hearts do not stir. There is no emotion because they view themselves and their race and their faith as being more human than that of others. And this is what we see around us. When we listen to interviews, when we see the tweets, when we see the endorsements from politicians, subhanAllah, sisters and brothers, you know, when we criticize Israeli policy, when we criticize aspects of what is happening there, we are accused of anti-Semitism. We are accused, oh, you guys are anti-Semitic. I will acknowledge, rarely this criticism is true. I will acknowledge sometimes some clerics and some people use a language that is not appropriate, and they talk about Jewish people altogether. And I say no, our problem is not with Jewish people. It is not with Christian people. Our problem is with Zionism. In our lands of Islam, Jews and Christians lived peacefully. They lived as neighbors, as full citizens of an equal opportunity with everybody. Our problem is not with people of another faith. Our problem is with policies. So I admit, once in a while, you'll find a cleric, you'll find somebody who uses language that is not correct, and there is an element of anti-Semitism. However, let us flip the script. Let us flip the script. You say we are anti-Semitic when we point out problems with Israel. Let me flip the script. How about your Islamophobia when you caricaturize and paint all Palestinians in a particular light? How about your hatred of Islam when you describe everybody in that region with derogatory terms? Our own president, some of the most powerful people in Congress, some of the most influential politicians, the language they use is the language of genocide. It is the language of dehumanization. Israel's minister called all Palestinians beasts and animals. That is not the language of humanity. That is the language of genocide. You are calling for all-out genocide when you say an entire population is subhuman. If you look at the language that is used, they don't deserve to live. We will annihilate all of them. Again, this isn't the few people that did what you consider a crime. If that was your call, I at least see where you're coming from. But when you extrapolate from 5, 10, 20, 50 people and you say all 2 million people don't deserve to live, they are not fully equal. When you bring into their faith, when you bring in their religion and you say they should be given hell, as the pseudo-intellectual Jordan Peterson said, he literally tweeted to Netanyahu, give them hell. Them is who? All Palestinians. We see the reality of their hatred. It's not about truth and justice. It is frankly about a superiority complex. They literally believe they are better than everybody else, and therefore the life of a Palestinian, the life of an Arab, the life of a Muslim in their eyes is not the same as their own lives. But sisters and brothers, I want to conclude the first khutbah with a little window of hope. A little window of hope. I say, as somebody who is an amateur in history, I love studying history, I say the tide is slowly changing. Slowly, but inevitably, the tide is changing. For 3 reasons. Firstly, social media and the proliferation of videos and cell phones and the immediate access that everybody can have to the truth. The fact that somebody can take a video of what is happening in Gaza and post it to YouTube, to Twitter, and immediately make it accessible, this is a game changer. Make no mistake about it. In the 70s, in the 80s, we couldn't do this. It was a very skewed narrative. Now, it is impossible to be blind to the injustices of Gaza if you have a heart. Now, it is impossible for anybody with a shred of humanity and an ounce of justice to think that this is a fair game between two equals. Not at all. Images and videos and interviews are available, and we must use them, retweet them, educate, and make sure the tide begins to change. So point number one, social media. And by the way, this is despite the problems that we're getting. Today, our Facebook, we had a generic post about we're going to be doing a khutbah about Palestine. Facebook complained. Somebody complained to Facebook and our post was taken down. Why? Were we calling for what? Because it said Yasir Qadhi giving a khutbah on Palestine. Our post was taken down by Facebook because we're simply wanting to educate. But they cannot take down every post. They cannot silence every voice. That's why I'm making a call to every one of you. Stand up with wisdom. Stand up with tact and preach the truth and educate. They cannot silence millions of voices, millions of images, millions of videos. That's what we need to do. Point number one. Point number two, despite the fact that almost all Western governments, even universities, corporations, companies, Hollywood, pseudo-intellectuals, are pretty much, many of them are supporting one side and completely against the Palestinian cause, despite the fact that France, which has challenged freedom, it wants people to desecrate the Quran, it wants people to make fun of the Prophet ﷺ. France has banned protests when it comes to Palestine. Germany has banned protests when it comes to Palestine. England is thinking of criminalizing holding a Palestinian flag. Look at the irony of free speech. Where is the free speech when our Prophet ﷺ is being insulted? You told us to shut up and sit down and let us do what we want to do. When we're clamoring for human rights, all of a sudden it is illegal in England, in France. It is illegal in Germany. England is talking about it, and even in our own home countries things are going back and forth. However, with all of that, I still say that never have we had so many public people and intellectuals and leaders and organizations speak on behalf of the truth. So yes, compared to the 70s and 80s, we actually have a lot more people, a lot of fair journalists, a lot of organizations preaching the truth. You cannot cover up the truth forever. And this harsh media assault by our politicians, by these right-wing organizations, frankly, it is a sign of desperation. They know they have to be super harsh, but they cannot silence millions of voices. So point number two, we actually do have people supporting us. And point number three, and one of the main points I want to make here, sisters and brothers, it's no longer the 1960s and 70s. The world has changed radically, and one of the things that it has changed in is demographics. We, as American Muslims, are no longer a very small minority. We're still a minority, but you cannot compare to how we were 40, 50 years ago. Within a decade, we American Muslims will be the second largest religion in this country. Right now we're the third, Christianity, Judaism, then Islam. Within a decade, Muslims are going to be more than any other faith except Christianity. In Canada, in Australia, and in England, Muslims are already the second largest demographics after Christianity. In France, Muslims are definitely the second largest demographics. How then and why should any other group take charge of the narrative when the demographics is changing? Where is our voice? Where is our contribution to the public discourse? Where is our influence on our own societies and cultures? The fact of the matter, and I say this bluntly, I am a person who has said and has got me into trouble, I don't believe politics is the primary way to change ourselves. That's what I say. I could be wrong. Even if it's not the primary way, it is the secondary way. The primary way, iman. The primary way, internally. That's what I believe. I could be wrong. My personal interpretation, number one mechanism, ourselves. But number two, without a doubt, Tie your camel and then trust in Allah. We have to tie our camel. We have to be involved in the media, involved in politics, involved in influencing others. And now, Muslims in all of these lands, we do have a potent force if only we came together and we actually mobilized. The sad reality, many of us live disconnected lives from our culture and lands. Many of us are apolitical. Many of us don't want to get involved, but that's not how change occurs. Why is one narrative more than the other? Because one group of people influenced it. This is not sinister. This is not cabal, Illuminati theories. This is politics. When you get involved and you campaign and you lobby and you raise funds and you influence, this is what happens. Where is our voice?